Hello, everybody. Welcome to Andy's Licorice Talk and David Shifrin's interview. The clarinet world, music world, and friends and relatives mourn the loss of Jim Ognibene and Joseph Rabai, clarinetists with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra in New York City. While I didn't know them as well as some, I had taken lessons with both of them millions of years ago and found that in addition to their substantial artistic contributions, they belonged to that true gentleman category. Jim was also known for his self-deprecating sense of humor. When I once asked him, with a confusing camera angle, if it was him playing principal clarinet on one of the Met Live HD broadcasts, he said, "Didn't anyone ever tell you there's a city ordinance against me playing principal clarinet?" Without further ado, we would like to present our tribute to our friends and colleagues.
As an Italian bass clarinet myself, I didn't know much about Jim Ognibene, but was moved by all the attention his death had received. I did a little research to learn more and was delighted to find that his family background actually was from my area in Italy, in the south of Italy. I would like to share this video where he talks a little about his view on the bass clarinet. I took this documentary from 8 minutes and I reduced to 2 minutes, followed by his beautiful solo in Wagner Valkyrie.
When I was approaching my teenage years, I started to discover the music. I started to hear classical music. Before I was in the high school band, there was a community youth band that I performed with that played opera overtures, that played transcriptions of classical music, and I just loved hearing that music. My father loved Benny Goodman and he loved Artie Shaw, and I was about 7 or 8 years old, and one day he came home with a metal clarinet because he loved the clarinet, and he said, "You're going to play this." And fortunately, I did like the instrument, and I went on from there. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed playing the clarinet, but it was my father who introduced me to the instrument. When I discovered that it was possible to make this a career, whether it be from a performance standpoint or a teaching standpoint, I was pretty sure that that's what I wanted to do. So it was later on in my life that I became interested in playing the bass clarinet. I bought an instrument and I realized that I had a lot of fun doing it. I enjoyed playing it and thought it would be interesting to delve into it more deeply, perhaps take auditions and go for bass clarinet positions. And that's exactly what I did. When we are performing, whether the music represents something happy or something sad, it's still music, and it's always to be played in its appropriate style. So if the intention is to be evil, you have to find some way of making it evil but still beautiful, because it's music.
Hi, I'm Anthony McGill, principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic, and thinking about Jim Ognibene. We worked together at the Met for 10 years, and he's probably one of the greatest colleagues I've ever had. And it was also because he was so just like down to earth, so normal and funny and hilarious. And he also was one of the greatest musicians, I've ever heard. When he would play, his sound was like a living, beautiful creature, playing these, whether it was Aida or whether it was one of the Wagner operas. His sound was bigger and greater and deeper and you could live inside of it. You could kind of touch it. It was so thick and beautiful and clear and expressive, simple, that, he really taught people. He taught me while I was sitting there next to him or down the row from him, listening to him, and he was just a fun person to play music with. And so that's about all, and we won't forget you, Jim, and thank you for being such a great teacher, a great role model, a great human being, and I can't really believe it yet that you're not going to be around, but you're going to be around, and we'll be able to appreciate everything that you brought this world. So thanks a lot.
Hi, I'm Steve Williamson. I'm principal clarinetist of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And before I came to Chicago, I was principal clarinetist of the Met Opera. And I was there from 2003 to 2011. And actually, even before that, I subbed in the orchestra from 2000. So I had the distinct pleasure of knowing Joe Rabai and Jim Ognibene, two incredible musicians and really wonderful, wonderful colleagues. We sadly lost both of them on the same day, and the clarinet world lost two giants. We're going to miss them, but I just thought I'd share a little story about each one of them. Whenever I got to play with Joe, it was usually last minute, so I got called to play second to him quite a bit. A lot of Puccini and Verdi, and it was a real joy to sit next to him. He was a wonderful clarinetist, and but I didn't really have much time to get to know him except at intermission. He would never leave the pit for whatever reason. He just liked to sit there and regroup, and that's sort of how he gained his strength for the next act. So we got to chat a lot during the intermissions, and I learned a lot from him. He's a beautiful man, generous spirit, loved jazz, and of course he loved the clarinet, and he played it so beautifully. Rest in peace, Joe. We will miss you. And lastly, I'll just give you a little bit of insight into Jim Ognibene. Jim Ognibene is truly, in my opinion, one of the greatest musicians I've ever known. And especially on the bass clarinet, I don't think I'll ever hear a greater bass clarinetist, not in my lifetime. Some of the most beautiful playing you're ever going to hear. And if you have the opportunity to go into the archives of the Met, the last 30 years, anytime you hear an incredible bass clarinet solo, that's Jim. Jim did not like the spotlight. He was so humble, and as a matter of fact, he called himself the last chair clarinetist in the orchestra, which is ironic because I think he was probably the greatest musician I ever had the privilege of sitting with. I learned a lot from him. But he could be a stand-up comedian. He was so funny. One time we were doing Valkyrie, and as soon as it was over, I guess 5.5, 6 hours later, we were in the locker room, and everybody's just, trying to recoup and, get out of there and get home. And his locker mate was the principal cellist at the time, and he said, "Jim, I don't know how you do it. Every time you play those solos, it's like you own them." And Jim immediately said, "Well, every once in a while I'd like to rent them out." And that's just how Jim was. He was so quick and so witty, and it never took a lot of words. It was always a very quick, short retort, but it was fantastically funny, and we were always in stitches. He brought such joy and levity to the pit, and he will be forever missed. So my condolences to both families. We love them both very much, and we will miss them. Rest in peace, Jim and Joe.
Hi everybody, my name is Jessica Phillips, and I play clarinet in the Metropolitan Opera. a position I've held for almost 19 years. And I am so honored that Andy asked me to say a few things about the two amazing, beautiful clarinet souls that passed away this weekend, Joe Rabai and Jim Ognibene. I played with both of them at the Met. When I first joined, Joe Rabai was still principal clarinet. I played with him for maybe 2 or 3 seasons. And I can truly say that Joe was such a mentor to me. The first time I ever subbed in the Met, I sight read Lady Macbeth of Miss Spinks, a Shostakovich opera, with Joe, sitting principal. And he was so kind and generous and got me through that whole entire opera, and that never stopped. He was so in love with opera. He was so in love with being a musician. He loved the clarinet. He always was trying new things, reeds. He tried the Wurlitzer clarinets. He was always curious and really loved music. It was in his soul. So he is such a beautiful musician and clarinet player, and played in the orchestra for many, many years. All the iconic Metropolitan Opera recordings, you're hearing him. And of course, what can I say about Jim Ognibene? We played together my entire career at the Met so far. And Jim retired last year, and of course we miss him and are deeply saddened that he passed away from cancer, a long battle with cancer. Jim is one of the funniest people I've ever known. He is so humble, deeply gracious. He never had a bad word to say about anybody. And you could look around during any of his solos, whether it was Aida or Don Carlo or Simona Boccanegra, Die Valkyrie, Götterdämmerung, any huge bass clarinet solo, and you could look around the orchestra and just see people listen and just truly enjoy his playing. And that's very, one of the highest compliments I think that the Met Orchestra could give somebody is their admiration and love. And we deeply, deeply are saddened by Jim's passing and Joe's passing. Two great clarinet icons leave us. We wish them well on their journey, and we will remember them in our ears and our hearts. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pablo Vinsky. I have been extremely privileged to work with the great Jim Ognibene in the clarinet section of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra for 8 years. When Jim Ognibene would play a chamber music concert, he would submit a biography for the presenters that would say something like that. Jim Ognibene is considered as one of the greatest musicians of his generation, according to his mother's opinion. That's his sense of humor. But I couldn't agree more with his mother's opinion. I do consider him as one of the greatest musicians of his generation, or of any generation for that matter. He was an enormous inspiration for me personally, and for anyone who knew him, for anyone who had the opportunity to hear him play. He was kind and respectful to his colleagues and extremely humble and modest. He spoke really generously about his colleagues with whom he worked in the past. And that's how I knew about Joe Rabai. Unfortunately, I've never met him in person, but I knew about him because Jim would always talk about the old generation folks. And he would say something, they could spin a phrase like no one else. And you could hear that if you listen to older Metropolitan Opera recordings, how beautiful and gorgeous and musical the clarinets sound on those recordings. So I'm really thankful for this opportunity to speak about Jim Ognibene, and he will always be remembered as an amazing friend, as a wonderful human being, an incredible inspiration to all of his colleagues and audiences alike.
Hi, my name is David Gould, clarinetist with American Ballet Theatre Orchestra, freelancer in New York, and the product specialist and artist relations manager for Van Doren in the United States. My friend Andy Simon asked me to make a little video talking about two legends we lost this week. First, Joe Rabai. Joe is someone I only met once or twice. I remember him being very, very kind, very thoughtful. I know he fought Bell's palsy and came back and started playing from it, so that gives you an idea of the perseverance that he had and stick-to-itiveness and the metal that he was made out of. Who I can speak a bit more about is Jim Ognibene. I got to know Jim over the years. I played a couple lessons for him. And he was a wonderful teacher, incredibly supportive. And then I also spent some time working with him, of course, at Van Doren and watching him try equipment. He was always phrasing, no matter what he was trying to play, picking the equipment. It wasn't a million notes, it wasn't staccato, it was music. I think that was the type of player he was, the type of person he was. What I can tell you, I remember specifically him playing the Simpsons theme, but phrasing it nicely. I guess he knew I was listening, but it was really great. I didn't play with him very much. I ended up playing for him a couple of times, as it goes, you know, last minute substitute sort of thing. But I did play sitting next to him twice, both times playing Electra. I was playing the basset horn while he was playing bass clarinet, and I can tell you, every note he played, you could hear resonate in that hall. I really think Strauss wrote that piece for him because everything he played was just incredible. I can hear it, the very first held note after the big introduction, or the dum dum da 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 dum. I can still hear that echoing back around the hall. It was remarkable. Something funny about all that, I know we played, and there's a spot that if you've played it before, either a basset horn part or the bass clarinet part, there's a part with these impossible offbeats, alternating. Some you play together, some you don't, and it's chaos. And it's, for me, having played both parts, the most scary part of the whole thing. And there are plenty of solos, but that was the most scary. And I remember we played it, and he would mumble all sorts of things afterwards. And I think, I just remember it, I'm going to laugh thinking about it, but he just said, good dogs, after one of the things where we finished that thing, just loud enough that we could hear. He was always doing things like that. And what an incredible soul, sweetest guy in the world. We all, every last clarinet player and musician should be more like him. Never had anything bad to say about anybody else. Quite the contrary, always said good things about everybody. And humble, patient. I don't think he knew just how great he was with an instrument and without him. I'm surely going to miss seeing him and our jokes and our joking texts and our Netflix recommendations to each other and just the whole, everything we shared. So, Jim, I hope you're happy. I hope you're well. I'm going to miss you forever.
Shifrin interview. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it or found it was a fitting tribute to two great role models. And I need to thank our colleagues and friends for putting this together under tremendous pressure on my behalf. I can tell you some of them drove to the funeral, for example, of Jim Ognibene's, and they made every effort, tremendous efforts to get this to me. And it wasn't easy for some of them. So anyway, we really appreciate that. We would now like to introduce our guest of honor, who has been extremely generous in sharing the spotlight today. And his name, of course, is David Shifrin. So bring him on. Hi, how are you, David? Thank you so much for your patience and letting us share the spotlight a little bit with our colleagues.
Oh, please. Thank you for that really beautiful tribute to Joe and Jim. Just
well, we need, of course. I mean, I know, I understand you were actually a co-principal in the American Symphony with Joe. So, if you wouldn't mind adding your own thoughts, I don't know if you knew Jim as well, but and just shoot, we'd love to hear it.
I only met Jim a couple of times, and of course, I heard his beautiful playing at the Met many times. And as a teacher, I've never considered myself much of a bass clarinet expert, and he was always the go-to guy for my students at Yale. Who I'd say, you really need to play the bass clarinet for somebody who knows what they're doing, and go into New York and find Jim Ognibene. Joe, he was the most wonderful partner to have for a kid like me. I was 20 and went into the American Symphony, and it was the year that Frank Cohen was there before me, and he had won the principal job in the Baltimore Symphony. And the way the American Symphony auditions worked was they had auditions at any time throughout the year. Even when there weren't openings. I think it kind of terrified some of the members of the orchestra that Stokowski would have these auditions and keep his little black book and with his notes and have somebody ready to come in at any time. But in my case, I took the audition. I was a student at Curtis, came up to New York about 6 months before I ever heard anything about it. It was just, you did it and forgot about it. But Frank went down to the Baltimore Symphony, and I got this call out of the blue that Mr. Stokowski had remembered your audition and would like to invite you to come and play. I was still a student at Curtis, and so I was commuting up from Philadelphia. And Joe had been there with Frank and was 10 years my senior. And, he was the big kid on the block, and I was wet behind the ears, as they say, and didn't really know. I had never played in a professional orchestra before. And the way that it was structured was there were 2 principal clarinets and 2 second clarinets. So you'd play half the program in one chair and the other half in the other chair. And Joe, as the senior member, couldn't have been more gracious about sharing and supporting. When he played principal, he was brilliant, and I learned so much from that. And when I played principal, he couldn't have been more supportive and constructive and encouraging. And I attribute that whole experience to an amazingly positive trajectory that I didn't always experience throughout my career, but I got a great start because of working with somebody like Joe, who was so warm and inspiring. And I would see Joe from time to time over the years because I worked at Lincoln Center. I still go there to play, but for a dozen years I was there every day, and I used to park my car right next to the Met Opera stage door. So I would see Joe coming and going lots of times, and he was always just the warmest, most wonderful, calming presence. And I hadn't seen him now in quite a few years, but I was just thinking about him the other day and wondering how he's doing. It's quite a while since he retired. I haven't seen him since we would run into each other at Lincoln Center. So I'm sad that he's gone. I won't have that opportunity again.
Thanks so much. Wonderful tribute, and we just learned quite a lot about parts of your background that we probably would have gotten to anyway. So that's terrific. Well, I usually when I introduce the guests, I'll talk about how I know them, and I've known this man for a long time in many contexts, but probably most outstanding was that he was a teacher of mine at the Gilliard School, and probably longer ago than we both want to admit. And yeah, and also it was already 8 years ago. I took a sabbatical, and he invited me to be sort of a guest professor when he was on a tour at Yale. And quite amazingly, I met one of his students, got to know one of his students who impressed me quite a lot. And then she ended up joining our clarinet section as a result. So this is just one very small example of a little action that David did that led to huge consequences, hopefully positive consequences in her case, certainly in mine as a result. So we're going to explore all that today. So the first thing that I don't know that I've noticed on the internet recently about you was this really talk about tributes, amazing tribute about you leaving your artistic directorship at Chamber Music Northwest after a 40-year tenure, and it was absolutely memorable. I mean, first of all, learning this contemporary piece and pulling it off the way you did, was very, very impressive. But for me, what surprised me, if you will, I expected to be impressed by the level of talent that would pay tribute to your talent and administrative skills. And indeed, as predicted, I was. Some amazing players paying homage to you. But what really struck me, and if you don't mind my taking a liberty, if I could read your reactions, was the amount of lesser established players or people who are now established talking about you, the gratitude towards you taking a chance on them before they had sort of proven themselves. And I was really struck by that. And I could tell when they did that, when they mentioned this, that you were moved. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the tables on you, and I'm going to ask you, who did this for you when you were starting out? Was there someone that took a chance on you? And, please talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, none of us, none of us get anywhere just on our own. And, and so, I'll go back to the Met Opera again, because before Joe played at the Met Opera, his predecessors were Roger Hiller and Herbert Blayman. I only met Roger a few times, and we were friendly, but Herb Blayman was my teacher in high school growing up in New York. And he's a guy that, was an icon and played at the Met. And I used to go hear him as a high school kid. My first year of high school, I was at Performing Arts in New York, and it was really just a few blocks from the old Met. And I used to get to hear my teacher in the pit. And he was a guy who was both encouraging and a realist. Probably the first teacher I had who gave the speech that so many of us have given to our students is to say, you're really talented and I think you have what it takes, but do you really want to do this? And even if you're successful, it's a miserable life, and and there's so many ups and downs, mostly downs. And if there's anything else that you really like to do, you should consider another career. And this is the guy who was playing principal in the Metropolitan Opera and getting to hear all those glorious singers and the most wonderful repertoire in the world. And he's giving me that speech as a 14 and 15-year-old kid. And I thank him for that, because of that, I went into this whole venture with my eyes open. So, and he also just instilled in me the notion that the clarinet was an instrument that could sing. And what better example as somebody who is there every night. So yeah, Herb gave me the sense of reality, and you know, I have to credit all my teachers for their inspiration. Probably most notably, after Herb Blayman was Tony Gigliotti at the Curtis, but before that, probably the most formative years were the 2 years that I went to study at Interlaken for the Arts Academy year round. And the most amazing experience to have Fred Ormond as a mentor, and that experience of living there, you know, at a school where you lived and breathed music every single day, and your teacher was there every day. It wasn't just the once a week lesson that I had experienced as a kid in the big city, but everything you did, you'd play in an orchestra, rehearsing in what was very much like a professional orchestra schedule, with 4 or 5 rehearsals during the week, and then a concert of a different program every week with a great conductor whose name was Thor Johnson, who had previously been the conductor of the Cincinnati Symphony. But Fred would be there. He'd come to rehearsals, he'd come to your concerts. Your teacher was there every day. And so having that kind of guidance at that stage of development was enormously formative. And then the summer studies that I had with, first with Mitchell Lurie out at Music Academy of the West, who's just an inspiring musician, and then with Bob Marcellus in Cleveland in the summer times as a student at the Blossom Center. I never encountered anyone who had really analyzed how to make the beautiful sounds and how to articulate and how to play the instrument, and realize you know, the technical consistency that is needed to play professionally. And when I talk about technical, I don't mean just you know, velocity and virtuosity, but you know, how to begin a sound, how to play a series of notes, how to play legato, how to play in tune, and what to do physically. He was an amazing influence in that way, and certainly as an example, just listening to him play, I don't think I ever heard a more beautiful sound come out of the clarinet. So those are some of the, if I'm still sticking to the actual question you asked.
No, it's wonderful. I mean, we
took a chance on me by imparting knowledge and skill.
Well, it's so funny because you know what, you don't remember, but I quote you all the time from, you know, I don't know, 30 plus years ago. I remember the words you used was, it takes a lot of dedication and sacrifice to have a life in music. And now I pass this on also all the time. I mean, it's a warning and so forth, but you know, I think, you know, do they have a calling or don't they? And this is what they're going to be up against, and you know, that kind of stuff. But I remember those were the exact words and the way you phrased it that really connected with me.
But now I can say, all these years later, that if it works out, it's much better than working for a living.
Yeah. Well, we love tributes to the older masters on this show. That we're documenting all this stuff for 100 years from now. Clarinets be looking back at this the way we might have looked at Behrman's videos or something, and then when people start going back to their teachers or those conductors, I mean, it's an incredible treat. So you've already opened this terrible door. I was going to go in this other direction. Now I can't help it. I have to go to the American Symphony. Okay, so just tell us a little bit about Stokowski. Well, first of all, I want to know, did I understand you properly? Did you say there were 2 principals and 2 second players? That means a 4-person section?
No, you were
with each other.
You alternate.
I see. Okay.
Which was a great model, I thought, that especially for somebody who's developing. I got to hear how someone with much more experience than I would handle the situation, and have a chance to really shine when I could. But it was only the clarinets and the flutes, as I recall. There was one principal oboe and one principal bassoon. And but in the flutes, Paul Dunkel and Harold Jones would share the flute responsibilities, and Joe and I shared the clarinet responsibility. And I remember now the bassoonist was Bill Scribner, principal bassoon, and the principal oboist was Arthur Krylov. And this is 50 years ago, and it was really something to be in there as a kid with these really luminary New York freelance players.
Yeah. And Stokowski, what was that like?
Well, he could be a scary guy, but there's all legends about how his little black book, right? I think it was the same book he had in the auditions. He made notes all the time. And in those days, there were 32 concerts a year, if I recall correctly, is 16 pairs. And each concert would be played once at Carnegie Hall and once at what was called Philharmonic Hall then, before it was Avery Fisher and Geffen. But Stokowski only conducted half of them, but he was around for all of them and all the rehearsals whenever there were guest conductors, and he'd be in your sight, especially in Carnegie Hall, in the boxes that were just a few feet away from the stage. He'd be sitting there with his black book, making notes, and the fear was that if the notes weren't favorable, that you might not be there the next day, because nobody was on an ongoing contract. There was an understanding that you hold the dates for the whole season, but each contract was for one set of rehearsals and concerts. I don't think that kind of thing can exist in a full-time orchestra now with union contracts and so forth. But it was treated as a freelance job, and so people were terrified. That fear is a motivator, and to do well. But I felt really blessed because I was just grateful to have the opportunity. I was still in school, and Stokowski was really kind to me and never gave me a hard time. And I'll say, unlike other experiences I had in the orchestral world at other times, he was great. And one of the thrills for being still a student and having a job like that was getting to play so often in Carnegie Hall, because that's where the rehearsals were most of the time. And they would open up the stage about an hour before the rehearsal. So if you got there early, you get to practice on the stage of Carnegie Hall, which I took advantage of. Get there, as early as I could, and just sit on the stage of Carnegie Hall and play the excerpts that we were doing in the orchestra, or play my Rose etudes that I had to play for my lesson the next day at Curtis. And this really happened. There was one day where I was just practicing and felt, the glory of being alone on the stage of Carnegie Hall, and I just felt this presence. Didn't realize how long somebody had been sitting next to me, and it was Stokowski, just sitting next to me and listening to me practice. And he was very nice, but I jumped like you wouldn't believe. Oh, maestro! And he says, "No, don't stop." I think, oh, okay. What am I going to do now? And he said some nice things. And it was very encouraging. So I felt really lucky not to be terrified at that moment. and he was 89 years old then, I think, and his conducting technique was unlike anyone else I had ever seen or have seen.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, good. I don't know what happened. Maybe my phone's too close. Oh, I touched something. I'm getting scolded by this Italian-based clarinetist next. Yeah, exactly. And now, thanks for pronouncing it so nice. Now it's going to give me a hard time about why can't you pronounce it like David? By the way, but before we go on, and it'll be happening all along, and there's way too many people, but a lot of colleagues are sending their best wishes. Charlie Neidig and Ayako and Frank Morelli, of course, is here, and Maury Bakun, and of course Sung-hee Lee. Well, we knew her as Sung-hee Lee before she became Sunny Kang. And John Ye is just chiming in message after message as usual. So you've got a lot of Charlene Zimmerman is here. And so on and so forth. Way too many people. I think Ashley Smith is on from Australia.
Wow, from Perth down under.
Yeah. So So anyway, just to let you know, you have a lot of support and people enjoying your stories.
Better watch what I say.
Well, before we go that way, I wanted to just continue a little bit with the more recent past, because I'm actually very interested about your Chamber Music Northwest career. So first of all, for those of us that are just dumb clarinet players, what goes into being an artistic director of an established chamber music body?
Well, the job description is pretty straightforward. You have a grid of a number of concerts to be presented. It's a blank slate, and you have to choose the music that's going to be played and the musicians who are going to play it. And and all of the attendant details around that have to be dealt with, and a very important part of that is financial. Although, as an artistic director, I wasn't responsible for any of the accounting, except to know how much money there was to pay to various artists, and not program things that were going to break the bank.
Yeah.
But that's the basics of the job. But it's also, being an artistic director is working with the community, working with the board of directors, working with the staff and the executive director to make sure that the business of running a concert series runs smoothly, and that working with marketing and so forth, so that people come to the concerts. And but the most important thing is choosing the repertoire and choosing the players who are going to play it, which would seem obvious. And maybe that's the nutshell description. There are pages and pages and pages that were in a job description when they did the search for my successors, and God bless them. Gloria Chen and Suvin Kim are going to take over now and going to take it to the next level.
So 40 years, right? 40 years you had that position.
Scary. Yeah.
Well, but I imagine, it must have become part of your identity almost. Artistic director of chamber music Northwest. What goes into finally saying this is the right moment to stop, and what emotions are involved? Some people will say, no, I was just waiting for this moment and it's just the right thing and I feel great. Other people, they can't let go. What goes into making the decision, this is the year, and how did you feel about it and everything else?
Hey, Andy, I just love the way you put that. No nonsense. Ask the question.
I'm not good at making friends, but I get to the point.
No. Because it's all of those elements at once. You get used to doing something that's part of your life, and you do come to a realization at certain times of your life. You haven't gotten there yet, where there's some things that there's just not room for everything anymore. And I've got 4 kids, one 26-year-old and 3 14-year-olds, and I don't see them enough. That's a big factor. And I'm getting up in years, and I have no intention of retiring or giving up the clarinet anytime that soon, or not teaching at Yale anymore. But something had to go, and it's Chamber Music Northwest has grown and grown, along with the city of Portland and the growth of the organization and the support in the community. The organization has done more and more, from 15 summer concerts when I started 40 years ago to hundreds of events now, year round. And and it was time, because it's gotten bigger, and my capacity for taking on even more at a time when I wanted to compact. And I made the decision about 6 years ago. And looking ahead to round numbers, 2020, it was the 50th anniversary of Chamber Music Northwest this year, and I've been doing it I have done it for 40 years, and so it's kind of round numbers. I turned 70 years old, which seemed like maybe think about doing a little bit less, but so it just seemed like it was time to think about that several years ago, and so I gave notice 6 years in advance, and it also gave time to make a really smooth transition, have a search, and overlap for a year with the successors, and work together with, in this case, with Gloria and Suvin, and we're still in touch quite a bit. And so to answer your question about how I feel personally about it, I feel good about it. I really do. It still hasn't hit me that I won't have to stay up so late making sure that the second Thursday of July 2021 that I have somebody to play second violin in the Mendelssohn octet. It's okay. It's just it's okay
Wow.
because
Yeah.
there's a lot of detail work that I won't miss. Of course, I'll miss the working with colleagues and creating programs, and so often I'll hear music of a composer that I like, and my thought immediately goes to, okay, we're going to use the commissioning fund and get that person to write a new piece, and I'll miss those kinds of things, but that's okay.
Well, but before we get off the topic of Chamber Music Northwest, since we have, I assume, a predominantly clarinet audience, you did have a big sort of gala clarinet event, and I think you need to just document that for a little bit, what it entailed and what it was and everything else.
Well, we've got to put more of those videos online, and some of those concerts are on YouTube, I think. But I've always admired the International Clarinet Society, Association, ICS, ICA, these big conventions. But I'm never really able to go to very many of them over the years because I've been in Portland at the Chamber Music Northwest Festival. But going to several of them, I also had an idea that it would be nice to do one that was a little more personal and a little more organized about what the marquee concert events would be. And I had an invitation from a really important donor supporter at Chamber Music Northwest a few years before I was going to retire. Said, well, what's on your bucket list? What would you like to do before you leave that we can help fund? I said, well, it would be fun to do something that was centered around the clarinet and maybe to start something that might possibly be continued into the future, not as a clarinet festival every year, but maybe centered around different instruments. And because one of the ways that I like to program was to have a theme within a season. The year before, we had a festival featuring the music of women composers. And other years we had music of Asian composers. And other years we have different genres that would be featured. We'd have featuring a different instrument, but we really went overboard with clarinet. And I got to invite some of my favorite colleagues to come and play. A number of my favorite colleagues were not available, but I'm so blessed to get so many of the people I consider to be the superstars of the clarinet to come and play all at the same time. And, we did a week of programming that involved clarinet choirs and jazz. We had Ken Poplowski playing jazz, and we had Corrado Giuffredi doing his thing and playing duets with Jose Frank Ballester. Sung Hee, who you mentioned earlier, came out and played some of the arrangements that she had played. Hearing the Bach, the Villalobos Bachiana.
I'm sorry.
Difficulties.
Yeah, again,
Yeah, don't touch anything.
he says I'm touching
Keep
something.
your chin flat.
I'm gonna, yeah, okay, handcuff. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's just having the opportunity to do these things and lay it out in a way that most of the participants could hear everybody, could go to each concert, and then all come together in this giant clarinet choir. We had 100 clarinetists that included all the professional players, some of the great clarinetists from the Northwest, all the players from the Oregon Symphony, and Ben Lulich coming down from Seattle. And the probably the highlight for publicly and for a lot of the participants was this clarinet choir that played outside in a park I think on a Saturday afternoon with 100 players. And I owe a lot to Jose for he conducted it and helped suggest repertoire. And we did things like Nimrod variation from the Elgar Enigma variations and Sousa marches and all kinds of, even the slow movement of Mahler's Second Symphony for 100 clarinets.
Wow.
And people really were taken by that, and it was great for the festival. It got a lot of notoriety in the media in Portland, and it was quite an experience for all of us who participated. And a number of people have said, "Well, you're going to do that again next year," and my very considered answer was no. It was a really, really major undertaking on top of everything else, but I'm so glad we did it.
Wow. Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. So you were also music director of Lincoln Center Chamber Music Society.
Yes, I've heard that. Yeah.
So a few others of us, and so I'm actually curious. Now, the Chamber Music Society in New York presumably was spanning a much bigger period of time within the year. What would the difference have been in being the artistic director in these two different major chamber music festivals? Were there similarities and differences, even in the music making, for that matter?
A lot of similarities in the music making, and honestly, since I was working with both organizations, I overlapped quite a bit and used it as a chance to try to form kind of pocket cells. Miniature repertory companies that would play some of the same repertoire in both places, play in Portland in the summer, and then play during the season at Lincoln Center, and frequently take group on tour through the Chamber Music Society's touring program. And my goal in doing that was to try to form ensembles that were not simply festival ensembles that would meet and then a few days later play a concert and then it'd be over, but to form little repertory companies that would stay together and play the same repertoire many times, the way an established ensemble, a string quartet or a piano trio would be the same members. And at the time, the structure of the Chamber Music Society was, if you make the differentiation, more of an ensemble than a festival. The way it started out in 1969 with Charles Wadsworth was there were artist members who would hold the entire season, and there would be guests who would play with those artist members. Now it's artists, maybe 100 different artists during the year who come together in some really amazing collaborations and who do stay together for a series of concerts, frequently going on tour. But the idea that I had, and the way I tried to blend having the festival in Portland and the society in New York, was to keep groups of musicians who played together a lot. There might be 15 or 20 performances of the Beethoven septet with the same players, and then do it in Portland, do it on tour, do it at Lincoln Center, and then record it. That was the goal. And some of those projects worked out really well. I still love some of the recordings we made in the I guess it would have been the mid 90s, Beethoven septet with Joe Silverstein playing violin and Paul Neubauer, Edgar Meyer playing bass, and Fred Sherry and Milan Turkovic playing bassoon. And after taking it on tour all over and having a group play together. It's not an original idea. You think Melos Ensemble in London and so many groups that are repertory companies, the Nash Ensemble in London also. But the Chamber Music Society had the opportunity to do this and the resources, and having the job in Portland at the same time, I was able to have them work together.
Great. So now I guess Yale is your only sort of titled position, official. I know you're very active, but this is your one thing right now. You don't hold too many other titles, right?
Well, I have a festival that I really love doing. That's in Phoenix in the wintertime. That's just a week-long Phoenix Chamber Music Festival that is part of the Phoenix Chamber Music Society. That's the presenter of chamber music concerts year-round in Phoenix. But they have a dedicated week-long festival that's usually late February, early March, which is a really nice time to be there. And been doing that for about 12 years now. And I keep, that's manageable for me, a 1 week of concerts, and it's a beautiful place to be. Sometimes it coincides with spring break from Yale. And
are you the artistic director of that as well?
Yeah, of that festival. Yeah.
Wow, cool.
And part of my job at Yale is as artistic director of the Chamber Music Series, the presenting series at Yale, the Chamber Music Society at Yale. It's named after Vincent Onepo, the Onepo series, and the Yale and New York series too. So put together chamber music groups with Yale students, alumni, and faculty playing together. And we usually play concerts at Weill Hall or Zankel Hall each year. And I've been doing that now for about 12 years as well. So I'm still doing all those things, but my day job has been and remains at Yale.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. I mean, especially in this situation, any plan? In fact, one of your students is here in Hong Kong, Claudia. I'm just, the world's kind of a mess, but the students, and particularly international students who, I guess it's starting soon, the school year. What is there a plan at Yale? Is it online? Is it not online? Is it let's see what happens? I mean, what's going on?
All of the above. There are lots of plans, and it's not all resolved. But I know that with certain circumstances, the students are being given the opportunity or to make a choice of online or in person, and even the in-person studies will be much different than before. And I know I personally won't be there very much in person, and we're talking about whether we can even have ensembles unless it's a trio playing in a large concert hall, each 15 feet away from one another. So it's very difficult, but everything has to be geared towards safety.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, from an international student point of view, not just Yale, but here, for example, our numbers would indicate things are a little bit safer here, let's say, than in the States. And the question starts arising, well, do I need to travel and stay in a dorm room or an apartment in Chicago to take online lessons when I can just stay, in Hong Kong, for example, or somewhere else? And, what are the pros and cons of that? And I think there's so much, it's very hard making these decisions because there's so many changes and everything seems so uncertain. It's very tough.
Yes, I agree. And setting the policy is above my pay grade at Yale, although I'm part of a lot of meetings to discuss and ask questions. And I think the guidelines that work for me are for each person to only do what they feel comfortable and safe doing, and that we'll find a way to make it work. Good. And in the scheme of things, about what's most important, with, you know, playing in an orchestra, money, being around your friends closely, on one end, and health and safety on the other, you know, it's not even close. Make the decision that is going to keep you and your family and your friends and colleagues safe.
Right. Good.
And so, you know, we all think, okay, it's been enough time, let's go back to normal, but nothing, you know, everybody's heard this. And but that you asked specifically about Yale. Yale is reopening. Students are coming back, but not all of them.
Right.
And students all have the opportunity, the choice to do whatever they can online. We're finding creative ways to do more and more online.
Yeah. That's actually what I've been noticing. I'm also doing seminars and whatnot online. This kind of program, or even my own videos and stuff that I started doing in January. We started locking down before you guys did. But, you know, when I look back to what even me, who's a complete techie dummy, but with the projects I was doing in January, February to now, and I'm looking at what's going on worldwide, it seems like, you know, should this continue for a while, the whole world might move very, very quickly. Things are getting developed very quickly, and the whole experience might be completely different in 6 months again, let's say, if we're still in this kind of mess or whatever. It's actually very interesting how things are just moving, I find.
Absolutely. And whenever this mess is over, if it's ever completely over, some of the positive things that will come out of it is that developments that had already begun years ago, ways to use technology that a few people were exploring have now become universal and will always be with us, and always be one of the things that we can draw on in making music and communicating with one another in an incredibly accelerated way because of the virus. So hopefully we'll keep the benefits from that after the virus is a memory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just looking, Michael Drapkin's here, and last night, your time, his daughter got married after canceling weddings. And so we did it, but I attended it via Zoom, and John Ye was there via Zoom. So I mentioned this, and someone got very upset. Oh, look at the world's a mess. People have to get married in this way. I said, that's one way of looking at it. The other way is, I doubt very much if the orchestra was very busy that I would have been able to fly. So now I'm attending weddings that I normally wouldn't have when things are good. There's always two sides to the coin. So
yeah, of course, Andy, we might not be having this conversation otherwise.
Right. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. So that's
we might have an opportunity every several years to get together, and when you're in Connecticut or we're in Santa Fe or I'm in Hong Kong, like we've been doing over the years. But
yeah, that's true.
Not like this.
Fantastic. I want to talk about, I always wondered, and now I know, Lalo Schifrin, okay? He spells his name wrong, okay? So I always wondered.
I don't know who spells their name wrong. But
but of course he's an iconic movie, Hollywood, composer. But you actually came here a couple of years ago and played a lot of fantastic tango music, as you remember, mostly written by him. Now, first of all, just clarinet aside, I had no idea that Lalo Schifrin is considered with Astor Piazzolla, you know, the foremost tango composer. I didn't even know that. So, you know, I learned that, but I am curious. I mean, those of you that didn't know, you know, they're related. He's written works for you, and this is obviously an important fact. Can we just talk a little bit about this relationship and how that has applied to you?
Sure. You know, funny you should mention, we've been playing phone tag the last couple of days. He's in his home in California, and we stay in touch, and it just, you know, sometimes months go by, but we've been exchanging messages this week. So it's a reminder that I'm going to call him after this when it's not too early in California.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
Yeah, we are related on my father's side, the name Shifrin. His father, whose name was Louis, and my grandfather, whose name was Louis, same Louis Shifrin, but different spelling.
I was going to ask you, what do you know?
We're first cousins in Belarus.
Wow.
And in the early part of the 20th century, when things were not so great it was Russia then, not so great for Jews in Russia. There was a diaspora and immigration, and my grandfather got on one boat, I think from Lithuania, and his father got on a different boat. My grandfather's boat went to New York, and his father's boat went to Buenos Aires. And so 2 branches of the family in 2 continents. And Lalo became a very, very successful musician in Argentina, a superstar. And after going to Paris and studying at the Paris Conservatory with Messiaen, among others, and playing jazz on the left bank every night, and came back to Argentina, kept developing his career. Dizzy Gillespie discovered him in Buenos Aires and helped pave the way for him to come to America. And he came to New York first, and got a phone book and looked up people with the same last name, and called my grandmother, and she invited he and his family over for Friday night dinner. And so that's how I met Lalo. And at the time I was, in elementary school, and I was interested in playing the clarinet. And so he was a big influence on my father, spend the money, get him a good instrument, that kind of thing. and then Lalo moved to California and started writing lots and lots of film scores, really did quite well. And when I, one summer after my first or second year at Curtis, I went to the Music Academy of the West in Santa Barbara, studied with Mitchell Lurie that summer, and I've reconnected with Lalo and spent a lot of weekends at his home and playing music and hanging out. And we kept the contact going. And a few years later, I was on tour in Los Angeles, and we hung out. And a few years after that, I moved to Los Angeles when I was in the LA Chamber Orchestra and the teaching at USC, and started playing in the film studios. And no small thanks to Lalo, who gave me my first studio introductions, and then introduced me to people like Henry Mancini and Maurice Jarre and Jerry Goldsmith, and all of the really amazing film composers. So for a number of years, I played in the studios as well, and spent a lot of time with Lalo and cooked up a few projects. And he wrote a number of pieces for me, some on commission, some just because he wanted to write them.
Would you mind naming, because this is really good. I'd love to know what Clarinet Works has written and
Sure.
for you.
Well, there's one album that we recorded together in Australia about 15 years ago. with the Adelaide Symphony, works that he had written for me. One was the Capriccio, it was clarinet and string orchestra that was commissioned actually by the Israel Philharmonic. And the premiere was supposed to be in the 80s in Israel. And I was supposed to go and play, but the date got changed because of some political unrest in Israel at the time. And the date that it got changed to conflicted with something else that I was already committed to. So Eli Iban, who was in the Israel Phil, wound up doing the world premiere with Lalo conducting. And then I wound up doing the American premiere with the LA Chamber Orchestra a year or so later. And then we recorded that in Australia in 2005 or such. The other work, major work, is a half-an-hour concerto for clarinet and large orchestra that's in variations form, and we premiered that with the Kansas City. I think it was the Kansas City Philharmonic then, or maybe it was already the Kansas City Symphony. But anyway, we did that with the orchestra in Adelaide, and it's on that recording as well. And then he gave me as a gift a piece called Central Park Variations. That's clarinet and piano, because I would always tell him how I wish I could play jazz, and because he's such a consummate jazz player. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to write a blues for you," and it was more of a concert piece in blues form. He called Central Park Variations. And so on that same recording with Andre Michel Schub playing piano is that Central Park Variations that he wrote for me. And then the other works, the ones you mentioned, all the tango pieces that we did in Hong Kong a couple of years ago, that are all on another CD called Letters from Argentina. And he expanded on the whole idea of tango to include not just tango form, but various folk idioms from Argentina, music of the Pampas, and gaucho music, and various dance forms from different areas of Argentina, and it's a beautiful suite. The notion of tango happened. I was on tour in LA, and we had dinner, and he said, when I was a young man in Argentina, and we'd go to tango clubs and play, and there'd always be a small group with a bandoneon and piano and bass and violin, and most often a clarinet also. So we should do something like that. And so I was still at Lincoln Center at the Chamber Music Society, and still in Portland, and put together a consortium with those two organizations, and with Jimmy Lin, who was the director then of the Summer Festival in La Jolla, California, and with Mark Nykrug in the Santa Fe Festival. We put together a consortium of 4 organizations that commissioned this whole suite of for that tango group, and we played it in all of those places, and with Lalo playing the piano, and made this recording, Letters from Argentina, which is a joy. Lalo stopped playing in public a few years after that, but we've kept the group going. We still have done tours
in Hong Kong. It was delightful, absolutely delightful.
And of course, Jimmy Lin was a big part of that too, because he had been to Buenos Aires and heard some of these authentic tango groups, and was really turned on by it, and so he's been a big force in keeping this group together, and of course bringing us to Hong Kong to his festival.
Yeah. Just a few things come to mind when you were talking a little bit before about your LA days. Stanley Hasty used to come. The professor at Eastman used to come to Hong Kong. We have an Asian youth orchestra, and he was the coach of the clarinets at that time. And I don't know. I visited with him a few times, and he said that you called him maybe to substitute for him at USC, gave him the house and the car, and what he'll always be grateful for was that he smashed up your car, and I sent him a bill, and you never scolded him or anything. That's what he remembers about this experience.
Well, Stanley, he was a great man. What a wonderful character. And, he was always really very gracious. I first met him when I was a high school kid, and I auditioned for Eastman, and he was very kind and invited me to come to Eastman. But I got a full scholarship to go to Curtis, and but we stayed in touch, and it was only a few years later that I joined the Cleveland Orchestra, and I wanted to focus on playing and not do very much teaching at that point. And they brought Stanley in from Eastman one day a week to teach some of the clarinet students at the Cleveland Institute of Music, because the principal clarinet in the Cleveland Orchestra traditionally is taught at the Cleveland Institute, but I didn't want to have a full load. Right. So he became a colleague at the Cleveland Institute, and that's how we reconnected. And again, I was talking about Joe Rabai, about 5 hours ago, about how he was so kind to the junior member, and Stanley was like that as well. He was, here's the master of clarinet pedagogy, and he was very kind and very supportive coming in, and Marcellus had finished out the first year I was there. Marcellus was still teaching at the Institute, but the next year is when Stanley came in and taught some of the clarinetists, and he was really wonderful, very kind colleague. So fast forward about 10 years later, I'd been in LA for a while and was teaching at USC, and started doing a lot more in New York, and traveling more for solo concerts. And I wanted to take a leave of absence from USC, and they asked me, who can you bring in? And I had stayed in touch with Mr. Hasty, and turned out he had family in Los Angeles. His daughter was in Los Angeles, and I think he had just retired from Eastman. And so I had the brilliant idea to ask him if he wanted to just take my students. And I was sharing the class with Mitchell Lurie at USC in those days. And Stanley wanted to take my place for that semester, and he did. And I had this really cool apartment in Pasadena that there was a pool and a tennis court, very, very Southern California. And this Volvo that that I think he had a little brush up on the Pasadena freeway, but it was great. He came in and did a semester for me. I can't remember if it was a full semester or a month or two, and it was just a car, man. Just nobody was hurt. That's
right. He appreciated it, since we're paying tribute to the old masters. So that's great. Now, am I wrong in saying, I'm just putting two and two together, just when we parted ways a little bit, when I came to Hong Kong and you were had a very kind of short stint at Gilliard, am I wrong in saying that maybe Hasty was coming in as well for a few lessons, teaching? I remember things were getting messy. There was
I don't remember. Perhaps that happened after I left.
Okay.
I think I taught at Gilliard for 3 seasons.
Okay.
Or three school years. Yeah. But then I was offered a bigger position at Yale. Right. I had been on a 50% or 75% appointment at Yale, and then I was offered to be the coordinator of the wind department and have a larger position at Yale that was full time. And so I gave up teaching in any other schools at that time. So I stopped at Gilliard, and I'm not sure what happened the next year.
Okay, right. Well, actually, since we're on this subject, well, first of all, it needs to be said that in our tributes earlier to Jim and Joe, Pablo Vinsky made a tribute.
Yeah, it was lovely.
Student of David Shifrin's at Yale, for example. Yet another. How do you like that? I just lost my train of thought.
Pablo Vinsky.
Pablo Vinsky. I was going to talk. We were talking about your teaching. Well, one thing that actually makes me curious about your life in Connecticut. Are you still in the New Haven Symphony?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that. I mean, you had actually a pretty thorough orchestral career, as a youth, and then really went in this completely different direction. And then all of a sudden you're playing in this very small orchestra 5-6 times a year, I guess. And yeah. What's the attraction? What's the, how does that fit in?
Well, it's a really good group, the New Haven Symphony, and the repertoire is incredible. And it's music that I love to play and is always a big part of teaching. Yes. All my students need to know that repertoire, and it's a really great opportunity for me to stay in touch with that repertoire, to get to play a Brahms symphony or a Strauss tone poem or a Mahler symphony once in a while with a really good group, without making that year-round, everyday commitment. And I love it. The conductor now is Alastair Neal, who I just have the greatest admiration for. For quite a few years, the concertmaster was my colleague Ani Kavafian, who teaches at Yale as well, and terrific players from really a wide sources of freelance players from New York and from Boston and Hartford, and tons of really great players from Yale School of Music. So it's a really first-rate orchestra. So getting to do that on a part-time basis is I was delighted to have that opportunity. And when I started to have a little more free time after leaving Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, it just happened to be a principal clarinet opening. And I auditioned, and with a lump in my throat and an elevated heart rate, at eight in my mid 50s, I took the audition, and thank goodness I didn't humiliate myself.
Wow. I think a lot of people were surprised, and I think so very impressed, and it also, I assume, gives your students a chance to hear you practice what you preach in a way.
Well, I hope so. And it also gives me a chance there's always a lot of opportunities for subs. So I get to help some of my students get a little bit of professional experience that way. And, I can't do as many concerts as there are. I probably do about half of them at the most. And so we have a co-principal or associate principal who plays second when I'm there and always plays principal when I'm not. And it's a former Yale student named Bixby Kennedy, who is a star. He finished a stint a year or two ago with the Ensemble Connect after leaving Yale, and has had a lot of success as a soloist. And getting to play with Bixby is really fun. And lots of my students have been through that section.
Great. I know. I remember what I was going to say. One of the guests a few weeks ago was Lawrence Gilliard. We knew him when he was Larry, but he made sure that he's now Lawrence. And and he described his whole experience about. He documented the first person that knew anything about his doubts was you. He quoted you at least 2 or 3 times, saying, you've got the basics. If you need to do this, you'll be able to learn it again. He brought that up a few times. I remember talking to you before I talked to him, and you always seem kind of fascinated by him. For those of you that didn't see the episode, this was a clarinet student at Gilliard who is now quite a well-known movie and TV star, Lawrence Gilliard Jr.
D'Angelo Barksdale, right?
Yeah, D'Angelo on The Wire, right? One of the top 5 or 10 TV series according to all the ratings. And so, he sort of told this story on the show about a month ago. And I remember talking to you. So we never talk much about it, but his name will come up, and you always seem sort of fascinated, like he doesn't sort of fit in with the template of most of your students. But I remember you saying something like, he says, I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm connected. And you would just say, well, just practice harder or something. I guess he didn't have that magic pill for him. But I'm just curious. I mean, what's your side of the story, and what were your feelings watching this guy, 30 years later now, an actor and still talking about the clarinet and talking about you and talking about playing a little bit and things like that?
Well, I liked him. I thought he was really talented, but it was pretty apparent that he wasn't practicing. And he didn't hide that. He said, I just don't really know if this is what I want. And I asked him about, well, what would you do if you don't play the clarinet, all that kind of thing. And it was a little bit vague. He said, well, I like to act. And I thought, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So I just gave him the same speech that Herb Blayman had given to me. Mm-hmm. And then, the next year, I think I wasn't teaching there anymore, and I never heard what was happening. Then I think I saw a poster for a movie. Was it Out of Brooklyn or something? Right. His picture on it, and I thought, that guy looks so familiar. And then I saw The Wire. That's Larry. I mean, Lawrence.
Yeah. No, that's what he said. Yeah, I mean, what he said was basically he just got on a bus, just knew this wasn't for him, and the next thing he knew, he did this one picture, and Stevie Wonder and Denzel Washington show up to congratulate him, and it's been like that ever since, and it's just bam, the switch. It was just fascinating. But I thought, you were actually his teacher for a while, and it must evoke something a little strange.
I enjoyed watching your talk with him on this show, and hearing more about filling in all of those blanks, what had happened. And it was interesting to hear that he's made a comeback as a clarinetist and played some concerts. And yeah, it is like riding a bicycle. You can put it away for a while and come back to it. And it feels pretty good for a few minutes, and then the muscle fatigue sets in, and you got to get back in shape. But apparently he was able to do that.
So how about yourself? I mean, I was actually quite impressed. You learned a modern solo piece for this farewell concert, which was very admirable and very impressive and well done. And I remember talking to you when I was in that sabbatical, and I asked you, as you're getting older and still doing this and still standing in front of, I think, thousands of people online, learning new works and on the spot in the solo situation. What do you do better now, as you say, over 70? What do you do worse? Or is it all the same? What I recall you telling me, and this was already 8 years ago, was that things like playing the Nielsen from memory is something you'd rather not do now, but you did back then. I don't know if that's still true, but what you did say is that you can solve problems much quicker. When things go wrong or whatever happens, you understand with all your experience much better now than when you were younger.
Yeah, a lot of matters of control and problem solving, just from experience. And it's funny how the voices of some of my teachers come back, and even if I didn't quite internalize what they told me 50 years ago, it makes sense now, and try to utilize that in teaching things like how to use the wind and efficiencies and tone production and in preparation and in practicing. And I just heard myself say that it's like riding a bicycle.
Yeah.
It comes back.
Yeah.
But maybe not so much when you get older. It's a use it or lose it kind of a feeling. So I do try to practice every day and be efficient with that time.
Great. Well, I'd like to just ask you a couple of things, and we can close it out. Especially as a teacher and someone who's had such a long and varied career. I mean, you've played in many orchestras, I believe, and still the New Haven Symphony. You've done competitions. You've done. I mean, your chamber music resume is just. I doubt very few musicians in the world have it, let alone clarinet players. Concertos, recitals, teaching, you name it. Okay, so what do you come across generally after I don't know how many years of teaching? When you give master classes, you hear auditions from around the world. What are the basic, let's say,
You have too many stuff.
Am I still muted?
I think you right now. Try to speak.
Hello? Can you hear me? I can't hear him. Okay, can you hear me? I'm so sorry. I must have got it animated and then hit something. I've just got to handcuff myself. So, what are the tendencies that you see in in students playing that you gravitate to regularly, time and time again, as a teacher?
Tendencies that I am attracted to, or tendencies that I feel need to be addressed, or I'm not sure.
You need to be addressed, that need to be addressed consistently or often.
Number one is use of the wind, and liken that to the bow arm of a string instrument. And it seems like a lot of players Andy, I hear something.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
This has been very bad today. Sorry. We never had this before. So, okay.
No problem.
Oh, I can't. Yeah. Can we hear me? Okay, got you. Yeah.
All right. I'll stop that.
Okay.
So my answer was that number one is use of the wind, and making the analogy of a string player that all of the finger work is like the left hand of a violinist, and the wind is like the bow arm, and I find that a lot of the students haven't spent as much time working on their bow arm. So I try to spend a lot of time on breathing, use of the air, support, preparation of the wind for articulation and for sustaining and for phrasing, and that's probably the biggest focus. And the second thing that I find is really important is time management and practicing, and how to learn new music, how to elevate your performance in things that you've already worked on, and how to use your time and practice efficiently. Probably those are the two things that spend a lot of time on that probably need it. In my
Well, it's funny you say that. It's funny you say that because I do remember you talking about the win, 30 plus years ago. But I'm personally amazed. I mean, because you, as you say, you have a reasonably large family. You're juggling this, you're juggling that, and you're still at it pretty hard. About your time management, I mean, do you have any very quick tips, overall things that you give us? Because I'm quite amazed at it. I don't think I could approach that myself. So
it's all. Should I keep talking? Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Yeah, we got you. I just don't know what's going on. I'm not even touching anything now. So
and I was thinking what a great platform this StreamYard is.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's the problem. The platform, there's some wire that's touching something, or I don't know. But anyway, sorry about that. Very deep apologies.
There's always something that gets neglected, when time management, and always reassessing. And I'm actually quite proud of myself for giving up Chamber Music Northwest, even though it's something that I've loved doing all these years, and just getting back some time to do, to spend time with the kids, walk the dog, maybe get out on the golf course, and practice on a fairly regular way, but without, being manic and hyper about having to squeeze everything in.
Great. And then finally, COVID or non-COVID related, just general advice for younger musicians starting out. I mean, it can be life advice, balance advice, music advice, training advice, anything, and give us a little bit of positivity about the future, especially in today's very uncertain situation as a musician.
Yeah, well, I think most of the people that I interact with, students, colleagues like yourself, you find ways to do what you love to do, and it's much more challenging now. And we miss the times gone by. I really do think that all the things that we've left behind for now are going to come back. It might not happen all at once. It might be slow. It might be painful. And we all have to find ways to survive and to flourish in the ways that we can. If you're a clarinetist and there's music that you have played in the past that you think you could do better, now is your chance to woodshed. If there's repertoire that you want to learn that you haven't, now is your chance. And chance to learn, catch up a little bit with technology and learn what resources there are available outside of what we already know. These are obvious things. Try to stay positive. I'm very lucky. We live in an area where we can just go outside and have fresh air and run around and walk the dog, take a hike, whatever. It's living outside of the city. And I think it's important to do that. But, I don't have any unique wisdom except to try to be resilient, do what you can, and wait.
No, but that's very encouraging. Yeah. Thank you very much. This has been really great to connect with you. again, and I look forward to seeing you more. Now, we talked about that once you gave up chamber music Northwest, hopefully when things become a little bit more manageable. Thank you so much for supporting our last minute tribute to our dear colleagues.
No, thank you for doing it. Thank you for doing that. The two great men. So, Andy, thank you for doing this show. I look forward, have a little more time coming up, to watching all of the ones you've already done with what a stellar roster of people that you've gotten to share things with. So thank you for what you're doing, and all the best.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.